I will never forget the time I met one of my best friends. It was a Saturday morning in the fall of 2014, and we were getting ready to start a game of Miracle League Baseball when I saw a little boy being carried in by his dad, and I decided to go over and introduce myself. The boy didn't talk much, but he agreed to go out with me onto the field and play. As we walked out on the field, I gave him a few options of what we could do to warm up, and he decided that we would practice batting. So he walked up to home base, parked his walker, I gave him the bat, took a few steps back, and pitched the ball. He went up, swung, hit the ball, swung all the way through, and bam, he hit the floor. As I walked over to go help him get up, I looked up to see if his parents were paying attention, because who knows what they were going to think of me after this. But as I pick him up, they aren't even looking. So now we try again, this time with me holding his hips to stabilize him. Through that next year, Colby and I started doing different things outside of Miracle League, like going to play places where he could practice climbing, or I even made him a stander out of PVC pipe, duct tape, karate belts, and a t-shirt so he could play on the Wii Fit. Everything Colby is able to do, stand, walk, hold the bat, or even play the Wii, are all things he acquired going through physical therapy. Pediatric physical therapists aim to help children be able to do daily living tasks more independently, such as holding a child's hips so he can hit the ball instead of hitting the ball for him. Because of this type of work, Albert Einstein's quote, "Most people see what is and never see what can be," is changing, and people are starting to see what children can do. I've always been interested in working with children with special needs, so as I started doing my research, I wanted to make sure that I kept in mind that children with special needs are people too and deserve to be treated correctly. So when I had my first interview with Daniel Swan from Our Children's House Baylor, I learned that other people share this same viewpoint as me. Another thing that we talked about that I found very interesting was that he told me it could be potentially 7 times more difficult for a child with special needs to walk than it is for me and you. And then we also talked about motivation and how for a child with special needs to be successful in physical therapy, they need to be motivated and wanting to work. And if they're not, you have to be able to find the reason why. And then he told me a story about a child he had with osteogenesis imperfecta, or OI. OI is a form of brittle bones disease, and he told me that he had this patient who was incredibly motivated to walk, and she really, really wanted to walk. But for her, walking wasn't necessarily something that would be successful because of how brittle her bones were and how easily they could break if she were to get hit or something were to happen while she was walking. But he said because of her motivation, they were able to allow her to walk in a pool. And then being in the wheelchair, she also had more independence. So as I went to my next interview with Heather Benningfield, a Frisco ISD PT, we really talked a lot about independence because she believes that her children or her patients deserve to have independence when they're in school because the way that your peers see you is very important to a lot of people. So she told me that as her kids grow older, she no longer would make them stand up in a stander in class. She would allow them to stay in their wheelchair, or maybe she would recommend to their parents giving them a power chair so that they could get around on their own and maneuver through the hallways quicker. So next I wanted to focus on some not so typical forms of therapy. So the first one was Botox injections. And when I had my interview with Dr. I, we talked a lot about Botox injections and kind of what they do for kids. She told me that the Botox injections allow for the children's muscles to be relaxed, especially for children with spastic cerebral palsy. But then as I did more research about these injections, I learned that for a lot of parents, the risks of these procedures can outweigh the rewards. For instance, some of the children have to have this procedure done every 3 months to see any success. It can be a very painful procedure, and it can also lead to botulism because Botox is made with botulinum toxin, which causes botulism. So these children have to be monitored and checked to make sure that they are not coming with any symptoms of this disease. Next, I focused on making physical therapy fun. When working with children, they really don't want to be at therapy. They've been at school all day, and now you're putting them into this situation where all they really want to do is just go home and hang out. But they need to go. So pediatric physical therapists focus on games and using their imaginary games and different things to help these kids have an enjoyable time. And then I focused on my last not so typical form was pediatric strength training. As I was reading, I learned that this is a very controversial topic in the world of special needs parents, because parents of children with cerebral palsy were worried that these children who have very stiff muscles, you're going to make them stronger. Won't you make them stiffer, and won't it be harder for them to move? Well, as I learned reading through this article, that didn't happen. These children, as they were gaining these muscles, they were also able to gain new skills, such as maybe they were able to sit up on their own, or maybe they were able to be put into a walker and have more success. Dr. Jan told me a lot about independence and strength training, because that is something she focuses on a lot. A very interesting fact about Dr. Jan is she works at a clinic for children with cerebral palsy, but she herself also has cerebral palsy. So she has this different sort of understanding with these kids because she's understanding exactly what they go through, and she kind of knows the loopholes they'll try to take. Like, she has one of the really cool things about Dr. Jan's facility was she has a gait lab. So the first time she meets any of her patients, she'll take them into this gait lab and see any type of movement that they have, whether it's they can move their arm or they can move their leg. And then she'll take that and find all these different activities that they can work on to improve that and gain more motion. We also talked about the different types of cerebral palsy, such as hemiplegic, paraplegic, quadriplegic, and there's also spastic, where the children aren't necessarily able to control their movements. We talked about how cerebral palsy is caused by oxygen being cut off to the brain, either before, during, or directly after birth. Cerebral palsy can affect a child's ability to communicate, their ability to walk, and it will also make them very stiff or tight. I really enjoyed getting to talk with Dr. Jan because she really understood what these children were going through, but she also was very insightful and knew a lot about the cerebral palsy, and her clinic was very interesting to be in. So one of my final interviews with Miss Mallory Ponce, who has now become my mentor. She works at our Children's House Frisco, and one of the main things that we talked about was the transitions that children make from wheelchairs to potentially maybe walking. And we also talked about some of the things that she'll do to help her children get there. I found it very interesting when she told me that she'll often use a hula hoop to help her children walk, because she's able to have them stand on one side and she stands on the other, and they can both walk together, and she's able to help them with their balance without really them knowing how much help she's giving them. And then we also talked about how the transition from a wheelchair to a walker would often be the child will go through a wheelchair, and then maybe they'll be put in a gait trainer where they can have a lot more support. And then if they're able to master their gait trainer, maybe they can be moved to a walker or potentially forearm crutches. So then after doing this research, I was able to figure out what I wanted to do for my original work. I decided that I would work with my buddy Colby, create therapy plans and goals, and then together we would work through them and make different games and do different things. So for the first day, I really just wanted to see what Colby was able to do, because although I've hung out with him a lot, we've done different things, I've never really kind of put him to the test, be like, hey, why don't you do this for me? Because he would probably say no, and then just sit on the floor and wait for me to pick him up. So after the first day, I was really able to figure out some different games that we could do. As you can see here, we did a lot with the ball because he thought that was pretty cool, especially if he could run me over with it. He liked walking on his hands, and that kind of allowed him to gain some core strength, and he was also able just to his body can be really stiff, and we kind of figured out that when I'm holding him upside down, it just kind of lets his body be loose. We would also play the We Fit, because for him to try and stand on that board and go from crutching to standing could be very, very difficult for him. And then through these different activities, I was able to make 2 goals for him. Our first goal was that Colby will work to increase his balance by 15 seconds each week through balancing games and different strengthening activities. And the second goal is that Colby will work to increase the amount of steps he can take by 2 each week, whether that is with a pole, which you will see in a minute, or with a TheraBand around his waist. So, after the first day, we met each week for 6 weeks for an hour. Now, although each week I had a different plan, we basically were hitting on the same things, just with different activities. So, some of the different fun activities we were able to do was the Wii Fit, or I was able to have him try and write in shaving cream with his feet, or he was able to have races or obstacle courses. Each of these activities were made to focus on a different area of his body, whether that was balance, or strengthening the core, or the arms, or just kind of for a little bit of extra fun. One of the hardest parts was keeping Colby engaged. Most of the times I would go to his house and his mom would have just woken him up from taking a nap after school, because when he goes to school, his parents make him walk all day long, which is not something he does a lot at home. So usually he rides home on the bus, and when he arrives, he is passed out. So he wasn't necessarily thrilled when I would come and pick him up to come and do some working out with me and not just be sitting on the couch. But as we worked through these plans, they did prove to be successful. And although Colby did reach his goals, the thing that I found most successful was to see his improvement in confidence. From day 1 to day 6, the activities that we would do were pretty much the same. And on the first day, where I would tend to kind of leave his side, he would scream. But then by the last day, I could kind of back up a few steps and he'd be okay. And he wouldn't freak out as much because he knew he could do it. So then, here is a little video of what we did.
Are you ready? Are you squatting? What was it? Something else? Anything else you want to say? Sign off.
And that was the fun that we got to have. No, I don't think it's going to exit. And then last, as I continue through this next semester of my ISM journey, I've gotten to start my mentorship with Miss Mallory Ponce. Miss Mallory Ponce works as a physical therapist at Our Children's House. I wanted Miss Ponce to be my mentor because I believe that the work that she's able to do is really kind of what I wanted to be able to focus on this year. And I look forward to getting my paperwork approved and getting to start this mentorship with her. And yeah. Thanks.